Alright, in this video, I want to talk about something that I haven't talked about really at all. I've mentioned in a couple videos, but it hasn't really been an explicit topic that I talk about, and that's cross-X. I think that cross-X is something that I wasn't really sure if I was going to do a video on about because I feel like it's really hard to do without really just like doing drills and practice of it that you really just do, like cross-X drills with your partner, cross-X drills with your teammates, just drills with people asking you, answering questions that are intricate and can pull out different arguments within the app. I think that generally I kind of like doing cross-X stuff more one-on-one or like more in a kind of like team practice setting, but I kind of figured out that maybe the best way to do a video like this would be to try to just give some overall tips on like what maybe the objective or the strategy of cross-X should be and how you should be thinking about your time, and then maybe break down some strategies of like ways that you can use cross-X against different types of speeches. When I was debating, I gave all different types of speeches. I've given every speech, and so I have thought about how to cross-X every speech and how to answer questions on every speech on both ends. Most of this I think will be about how you can like use your cross-X time to like ask particular types of questions, the types of objectives that you should generally be aiming for when doing cross-X. And so none of this video will probably cover a lot about like what I think about answering questions in cross-X. And I might do a video on that, I'm not really sure. But in general, I think that my normal advice for a cross-X is that you should always think about what you're trying to accomplish in relationship to the judge, not really what you're trying to accomplish in terms of the other team. I feel like a lot of people walk into cross-X and they immediately try to jump on how can they prove the other team wrong or make the other team seem like they don't know as much as they do. And I think that sometimes that can not really pull the judge into figuring out like what the strategy is and how you're trying to execute it, and like showing holes in the app really strategically, that when you do show those holes, the judge can really perceptually understand and like be in on the type of argument that you're trying to create from whatever is happening with the cross-X. So I generally think that you should walk in the mindset that it's about putting the judge on the same page for things that you already know and like the ways that you can use knowledge that you already know, than to just try to like prove the other team wrong or argue with the other team. I think that you should walk in assuming that I don't think that you should walk in assuming that you know everything, even if you know the answers to the questions that you're going to ask. Because I think that when you kind of ask questions, assuming that you already know the answer, then you may not ask like maybe some of the more elementary steps or parts of the question that kind of lead into the kind of bigger thing that you're trying to point out throughout the cross-X strategy. And so I think that you should generally try to walk in thinking that you have a set of questions or a set of things that you want to ask about, and a type of objective that you want to reach, because you think you know the ways that they'll answer these questions and reasons that it could possibly hurt them. But I think that you should try to walk in thinking that you're asking the questions from a perspective of someone that doesn't have complete knowledge of everything that's happening in the round. And so that means that you should always try to walk in a process at least having an idea of how they're going to answer your questions when you ask them. I think it's pretty dangerous and scary to walk into a cross-X having like no idea how they're going to answer the questions that you ask, because you could end up like shooting yourself in the foot or stumping an argument that you're trying to make without the proper knowledge of like what their response will be like. So I think generally in terms of trying to keep control of the cross-X and keep control of like what type of answers that you should get, that you should ask questions that you think are either like allows you to get a better understanding of the argument that they're making if you don't understand, because I think finding clarity and being able to like clearly argue against arguments is really important, and there's no shame in not knowing things, and you should be able to walk in and ask questions for the sake of clarity. But I also think that when you're going in a more strategic route or trying to figure out how you can pin the other team into a certain argument, you try to go in with questions where you feel like you could take them down a train of thought of ways that you think they'll already be answering the questions, things that you think their argument like has to defend in order for it to make sense. And then once you take like the essential pieces of what their argument would have to defend, then you can kind of like take them down a line of question that makes them defend something that's a bit less comfortable. I think the last tip I'll give generally about cross-X on everyone is just don't spend forever on one kind of question. Cross-X is super short. It's 3 minutes. It's like the shortest allowed amount of time of speaking within the debate. And so you need to be efficient with that time. I think it's really easy to get lost in the 3 minutes in terms of just like letting someone over explain or trying to like really beat in on this one question that you want them to answer a particular way that you feel like their answer doesn't make sense to you or isn't the way that you feel like the debate should be going. And I think it's really easy to get lost in that instead of trying to like reposition the cross-X in something that's more strategic for you. So now that we've kind of gone over some general tips for cross-X in general, we can talk about the speeches specifically. So we can first start with the 1AC and the 1NC. I kind of ended up breaking these speeches into like the first two constructed speeches, the 1AC, the 1NC, then the 2AC, and then the 2NC. So for the 1AC and the 1NC, I think that both these cross-sects is about like setting the stage, and you're trying to use this cross-sects to get exactly what the other team will defend, so that you have like clear points of contestation. I think that this is a place where people generally sleep on the ability to have like really generic questions about just like, will the app defend these things? Will it defend that it does this? Is this the outcome of the plan? Like, if we win this, do you lose? I think sometimes people don't like these questions because they kind of see them every debate, but I think that they're actually really important in terms of just like setting the stage and the type of competition you want to have with the app. So for whatever type of argument you're reading or you're thinking you're going to go for into the debate, I think it's good for you to try to set up key points of contestation where you feel like the app can where the app or the neg can be forced to defend a position that's like really central to their argument, that you know that they're going to definitely say yes to, and that you just want to be clear so that later on in the debate it's harder for them to shift out of those things. I think it's also a decent place for you to just test the general knowledge that they have of the argument versus the other team, while also getting a taste of how they respond to the arguments that you're reading. So like when you might be making arguments that aren't necessarily essential to like your overall 2NR strategy, or just things where you want to see how the app could respond to certain arguments. And I think the 1AC and the 1NC are really the places where you want to test to try to get a foreshadow of what their 2AC, their 2NC might look like, because that can give you a lot more insight into how you should respond and try to like preemptively strike against whatever they're doing. And so you can kind of pull from cross-sects in order to even maybe preempt some arguments that they haven't made in the debate that they were trying to hide in their pocket but became part of the conversation. So I think for these spaces, your general objective should just be trying to set the stage for the debate, set your points of contestation, and try to get like general understanding of what the other team's like gut reaction to the type of arguments you want to make. In the context of the 2AC, I think that this is a place where I don't think people ask enough about like other people's evidence. I think it's the place where you can get a lot of teams to squirm on defending like some of the authors they may be less familiar with. So like, especially when you're cross-sexing the 2AC, it's really, there are a lot of things that end up being read in relationship to whatever position that you're reading that are kind of maybe sometimes outside of the immediate bounds of like the literature base that the 1AC is in. And so I think it's a place where you can really ask them about like, maybe some of the other things that the author within their evidence is defending that aren't essential to the 1AC, and that can maybe open up maybe some of your link arguments or their points of offense that you can make based off of the things that the 2AC have read. I think that especially at the high school level, being able to really offer a set of cross-sex questions that can let you develop into making offense based off of someone's 2AC can really make it hard for the 1AR to come back or to have a way to get a foothold in the debate, because you've opened up so many other points of offense that maybe the 1AC doesn't really have covered in terms of like what its method reaches. And I think that can be a real difficulty in a lot of people's abilities to get a clear defense of like what their method looks like or what their politics looks like. And I think that can be a place where you can kind of make the debate a bit messy if that ends up being your style and the way that you want to kind of set up your arguments later on. And that's how I think the best way for you to set up your block arguments. In terms of the 2NC, I think this cross-sex is pretty underutilized, and where I feel like a lot of debaters get really frustrated. I think that you should try to touch as many parts of the flow from the 2NC as you can in order to make sure that you're getting both foreshadowing 1AR offense and bringing clarity so that the 1AR isn't kind of like sitting there in cross-sex not really understanding what's going on. I think it's definitely good to check in with your partner and to just have a clear strategy of like what you need to know in order to have a clear vision of what your strategy for the next speech is going to look like. And I think it needs to strategically be able to break up the coherency of the block by maybe pushing the 2NC on something they didn't spend a lot of time on, or a place where you feel like there was a hole. Because I do think although the 2NC has this like large block of time, I don't know if that necessarily means that every 2NC is like perfect on their execution of being able to use that block of time. And so I think that you should generally try to find the holes of where they're not spending a lot of the time and try to figure out why that part of the flow is like so important for them, and maybe possibly find ways to exploit it. And this could force things like making the 1NR adjust their time to address arguments that were made in cross-sex, and bringing out stuff that's going to pivot the debate in the 1AR, that you're kind of like throwing new obstacles in front of the neg block in order to kind of like change their strategy and get the time skew back in place for you. I think that the cross-sex can be super powerful here, because in a world where you can throw more obstacles than originally planning on to a neg block, not only are you kind of like helping yourself in terms of giving the 1AR more time to breathe, but you also could be kind of breaking up the essential strategy of the block, and that could mean that you could like catch a team trying to do too much in that short time, and without the right ability to adjust to what's happening in the debate, it could become a lot more difficult. But hopefully these tips were helpful for you to think about cross-ex, at least against all the constructed speeches. Maybe I'll end up doing another video in terms of answering cross-ex questions, but hopefully for now this stuff did at least a good job of helping you think about what types of things you need to be thinking about going into the different cross-exes that happen throughout the debate.